Welcome, sojourners. Welcome to the Truth Answer Man. As this first video on the subject of truth, this will serve as an introduction. I'd like to explore the subject of truth as the basis for all other investigations into the human experience. But rather than delve into all of the intricacies of a philosophical discussion on truth, which could take volumes, this introductory video will explore truth as the basis, that is, as the starting point for all other inquiries into the arena of human existence. All right, so why is it so important to establish the meaning and significance of truth before we move any further? I look at truth this way. I look at truth as the needle on the compass of reality, and reality itself can be quite an extensive topic, and I'll touch on that a little bit in future videos. And truth, we can also look at truth as the needle that points true north. If it is the needle on the compass of reality, which I believe it is, truth is what binds reality together. And when I say reality, I'm referring to reality as a measure of all experiences, all human experiences, obviously, and that includes all recordable, all knowable, all relatable, and sequentially referenced events within the physical universe. And all of this also includes the universe of the mind, or as I like to refer to it as the noetic universe. As part of this series on truth, I want to spend some time examining reality, as I mentioned earlier, and we'll get into a little bit of that in future videos. What exactly is it? That opens a can of worms. When you ask that question epistemologically, a can of worms, and we could delve into that topic for several videos and maybe never reach a satisfactory answer for some people's um, appetite, but I will touch on that in future videos. I won't be delving into the particulars of different kinds of truth, such as moral truth, ethical truth, scientific truth, religious truth, etc. What I want to do is touch again on truth as the basis or as the absolute reference point for all human experience, I should say. Okay, back to truth as an absolute point of reference. What I'm referring to, let me give you a couple of examples when I say absolute point of reference, is representing truth, for example, as the zero on a number line. So if you take that simple example of a number line and zero on the number line and move 4 spaces to the right of zero, you can say you've arrived at positive 4 on the number line. Or if from 0 you move 6 spaces to the left, you can say you've arrived at the point negative 6 on the number line. And that is all based on the reference point 0, the starting point. You can also use a very simple example of 0 on a thermometer. You've got plus or positive degrees, you've got negative degrees. You're using 0 as your absolute point of reference. This is the same way I look at truth. This is how I'm going to be looking at truth as we get further into videos in the future. Another real simple example, and there are probably hundreds I could come up with, is that truth is the null or the empty set in mathematics. So anyone that's got any experience with set theory in mathematics, especially if you've looked at or have investigated null sets and all the different kinds of sets that can arise in math, all other sets contain elements, so they aren't empty. We can say that because we know what an empty set, the null set, is. We can then use the null set or the empty set as our absolute point of reference. So truth in this example is point A. In measuring the distance from point A to point B, it's a starting point. It's a reference point. Or you could say you're measuring the distance from point B to point A. In that case, point B is your point of reference, the absolute point of reference. And all of these examples are just aids to help us understand where I'm coming from as far as using truth as an absolute point of reference. So it's really hard to talk about reality or many other topics in the theory in the endeavor of philosophy, mathematics, other fields of study without establishing a point of reference, an absolute point of reference, in this case, truth. So this is the axiom. An axiom is a truth that I want to establish. When we understand that truth is the measuring stick of reality, we can then move on and talk about truth in more general terms. So that is my objective in this first introductory video on truth, is to establish truth as the absolute point of reference. There are those, of course, who would disagree with my assessment of truth as an absolute, considering truth instead to be relative. Let me touch on relativism or relative truth just briefly before we move on in this series. What is relativism or relative truth? Relativism generally, or relative truth, is defined as an idea that views are relative to differences in perception and consideration. In other words, that to relativism, there is no universal objective truth according to relativism. Rather, each point of view has its own truth. The major categories of relativism vary in their degree of scope and controversy. There is moral relativism, for example, that encompasses the differences in moral judgments among people and cultures. There is truth relativism. That is the doctrine that there are no absolute truths. That is, that truth is always relative to some particular frame of reference, such as a language or a culture, which could also be looked at as cultural relativism. Descriptive relativism seeks to describe the differences among cultures and people without evaluation, while normative relativism evaluates the morality or truthfulness of views within a given framework. The problem right off the bat with relativism or relative truth is that it's self-contradictory. Take, for example, this very simple statement, very simple premise. All truth is relative. Therefore, there is no such thing as absolute truth. Is self-contradicting. If there is no such thing as absolute truth, then this very statement is false, therefore negating relative truth. That's just one of the problems with relativism. There are others that I may touch on as we go on with this series. So in the following videos, I will be presenting information on other areas of study in philosophy and touch on some areas in theology as well. That'll serve as foundations for furthering this discussion on truth. So again, thank you for listening in on this first video in the series on truth, and many others in many different areas to come that I hope and believe will prove very interesting. I hope to give you perspectives that possibly you've never heard before or never looked at before in the coming weeks and months. So I look forward to having you join me, and we can work together through these discussions and observations. So until that time, be safe. See you next time. Thank you.